Joining us live, the Housing Minister, Robert Jenrick. Very good morning to you, Mr Jenrick. Where's the Prime Minister this morning?
Well, I believe the Prime Minister is going to be visiting a hospital later today. He's getting on with the job. He doesn't diminish the significance of what was said or people's desire for answers and explanation and people's perfectly legitimate and understandable desire for us to be learning lessons from what's happened so far in the pandemic.
But
we also have to keep on responding to the pandemic.
This is the morning. I mean, we have not interviewed the Prime Minister on this programme for a ridiculous amount of time, 1,450 days. Today is the day, after 7 hours of criticism of his catastrophic handling of the pandemic, the delays going into lockdown, the mess over testing, the lies told by the Health Secretary, particularly over care homes. Why is the Prime Minister not in the seat you're sitting in, talking to the public about what you got right and explaining why he believes Dominic Cummings is wrong?
Well, the Prime Minister did speak yesterday at Prime Minister's questions in Parliament.
He hadn't listened to Dominic Cummings' evidence, with respect, Mr Jenrick. He said he hadn't listened to it.
Well, the Prime Minister does have a job to do, which is to continue to respond to the pandemic. So, no, I'm sure he didn't have time to listen to all of the evidence yesterday. But he did say in Parliament very clearly that he feels desperately sorry for those people who've lost loved ones over the course of the pandemic. But at every turn, and I think people will understand this, I hope they will, at every turn, he did what he thought was best, the best interest of the country, to protect people's lives, to minimise the loss of life, to protect the NHS, and to help us to weather the storm. And that
so why didn't we go into the first lockdown earlier? If he did everything right, why didn't he go to the first 5 COBRA meetings, and why didn't we go into the lockdown earlier?
Well, he did everything that he thought was in the best interest of the country. These are very hard decisions. The decision to lock down a country isn't an easy one. It has huge ramifications, as we know today, in terms of public services, people's livelihoods, and broader mental health and other harm. So it's not an easy decision.
So was he
but
right,
he took
then?
it listening to the best experts'
Are you saying that he was right not to
advice.
go earlier into that first lockdown? We've literally just heard from a woman who lost her father, who was vulnerable, who says that if you'd gone into lockdown earlier, her father's life would have been saved. So are you saying this was such a difficult decision, he took it absolutely at the right time?
I think that's hard to judge. It will be no doubt something that will be a subject of the public inquiry next year. But from the meetings that I was in, the Prime Minister took that judgment with the utmost seriousness, listening to the advice that he had from the scientific officers and medical advisors, trying to come to a balanced judgment of when was precisely the right moment for the country to go into that very difficult period of the initial lockdown. I completely understand that for many people, there will be answers and there will be questions and issues they want us to provide greater explanation on, and that will be the subject of the public inquiry.
One of the difficulties, Mr Jenrick, one of the difficulties, of course, for you this morning is you are the person that the government has put forward to have to try and respond to the claims that were made by Dominic Cummings, claims that, of course, we do need to see evidence for, but claims that we would like to see being answered to. And we've been hearing, as Susanna said, from our viewers who have lost family members. One of our colleagues, who I'm sure you're aware of, Kate, is here with us, whose life has been turned upside down as her family because of what we've all been through and what she's been through because of COVID. And the difficulty is, you're saying they did the best that they could, but when we hear what was being talked about yesterday by Dominic Cummings, about the chaos that surrounded some of those meetings, about the lack of attention and the fact that Boris Johnson enjoyed the chaos, it's very hard, as Kate very eloquently put it, it's very hard to understand that they cared enough. They didn't really know. Everyone would say it was a very difficult situation. Who would have done it better? Not sure anyone could have done it better. But the problem is, when we hear that people were skiing, when we hear that the COBRA meetings weren't attended to, when we hear that Boris Johnson was enjoying the fact that the chaos was surrounding him, so everyone was looking to him, that actually it was more about themselves than the public, and they just didn't care enough.
Well, all I think I can say to you is that having been in many of those meetings, having been close to the heart of our response, particularly in the early months, the Prime Minister in particular, but everyone else in government as well, did everything they possibly could. They were working phenomenal hours. They were trying to look at every avenue, explore everything that could be done to protect people. Was every decision made, which with the benefit of hindsight, in the best possible way? I'm sure that the answer to that question, in honesty, is no. There are things that we could have done better, and we can learn from. What are those things that you think
you could have done better
already? I think
it's wrong
to say that, to question the motives of the individuals, because I can assure you that they were acting with the absolute best intentions.
Well, we'll have to take your word for that.
Of the country at heart.
We'll have to take your word for it. Like we were listening to Dominic Cummings yesterday, and we were hearing what he was saying. It's important that we listen to you and hear what you're saying. But what were those things that could have been done better? Just initially, from your own research. And I know the inquiry is going to come, and it's going to be a much clearer exploration of exactly what could have been done. But right now, a year and a bit in, for what we faced, this unprecedented pandemic, what things do you think could have been done better?
Well, in the areas that I'm responsible for, there were things that pained me enormously, like, for example, the fact that the guidance was either not clear enough or was misinterpreted. So you saw some people's funerals with very, very few of their loved ones, even their husbands and wives, not being present. That I thought was hugely distressing at the time, and we corrected that as quickly as we could on perhaps issues that affected more people across the country. Many people are right to look at whether we got it absolutely right with respect to care homes. Of course, we did learn a lot about the virus as we went along. We didn't know at the beginning how transmissible it was amongst the asymptomatic.
We heard as soon as we did say that a protective ring had been put around care homes. The Health Secretary said that regularly when we were getting first-hand evidence from people within the care home sector, from care home residents, saying we are being hung out to dry here. In fact, I think we've got that comment, exactly this. It sounds like that's what one of the lies that Dominic Cummings was talking about Matt Hancock yesterday.
Well, let me go further than that. He said it was complete nonsense. He accuses the Health Secretary of lying on multiple occasions. We were told categorically in March, he said, that people would be tested before they went back into homes. We subsequently found out that hadn't happened. Was the Health Secretary lying?
Well, the Health Secretary strongly disputes those allegations. He's already said that, and he's going to be speaking in Parliament later today. So we'll hear directly from him, and I'm sure he will want to address those very serious allegations. In my experience, the Department for Health were going through something which was hugely challenging, and of course, there were things which didn't go as well. There were some things which were hugely successful, like the vaccine rollout. But with care homes in particular, we did take steps quickly. We did provide over £3 billion of funding to the care homes so that they could put in place
before they went into care
protective
homes
measures
in the early part of the pandemic?
Well, I think that's a legitimate challenge. One of the issues there
is... If it's a legitimate challenge, that suggests that you think that people were not tested.
Well, if I could just finish the point, because I think it is an important question, and one that I'm sure will be the subject of further inquiry. But the issue there, as far as I'm aware, is that in the early stages, we didn't know how transmissible the virus was amongst the asymptomatic. If we had known that, then I'm sure that there would have been even more testing of individuals being discharged from hospital
right, so you
into care
admit
homes.
that
As soon as that became
not everyone
known
who went
and
into
tested,
a care home was tested, despite the fact that Matt Hancock said people would be tested before they went back into homes, and Dominic Cummings says that was nonsense. You agree with Dominic Cummings that the idea that everyone was tested before they went into a care home was nonsense?
Well, as soon as the evidence became clear that the virus was being transmitted by the asymptomatic, then we really redoubled our efforts to make sure that people were being tested before they were discharged. Before that point, and I wasn't as closely involved clearly as the Health Secretary was, but before that point, it was much harder to make that judgment. And so I'm sure that some people were discharged without being tested, and that, with the benefit of hindsight, is very distressing and very difficult. We did do other things, of course, to try to support people in care homes. The funding, working literally round the clock to try to get PPE to care homes, which was a hugely difficult issue at the time because the international supply chains were breaking down.
Yeah.
We simply
and as
couldn't
we heard
get hold
from
of the
Dominic Cummings,
materials.
PPE was being put on ships, which were going to take months to arrive rather than being put on aeroplanes. I mean, we could talk a long time about this, but Kate wants to ask you a specific question.
Yes, I do, Robert, if I may. Look, I mean, the fundamental thing from yesterday people will take away is that your government has been accused of tens of thousands of lives being lost unnecessarily. And I think some people have heard some of his comments and think it was about incompetence. And some people have heard some of his comments and think that it wasn't enough caring. Now, I've talked to Boris Johnson during this time. I believe he does care. I think you care. I think Matt Hancock cares as well. The problem is you have a trust problem. And you've got to do something about it. Otherwise, more lives are going to be lost. Thousands more, because nobody knows whether to believe your advice now, because they don't know whether you're doing it to save your own jobs, to save the government's position, or because it's the right advice. So if Boris Johnson waits for the public inquiry next year, I think your government has got a big problem. And I can accept the fact that nobody knew what was going on, mistakes would have been made. But not being able to admit those mistakes until now, I think, is a problem. And I think you have to address it. And he has to do it quickly.
Well, Kate, I completely understand and respect your view, of course. We've tried to be as open as we can be throughout the whole of the pandemic. For most of it, the Prime Minister was doing almost daily press conferences, except for when he himself was very ill in hospital.
But now
we've been publishing the advice that we've been receiving.
Of having wrong information of them. And of him, you know, being irresponsible about them. So they're kind of meaningless now. And he has to come out and clarify. He can't wait for next year.
I understand that. I don't think that the answer is to begin the public inquiry now. I do think it's better for us to continue responding to the pandemic now. There are still millions of people who haven't been vaccinated. We're still dealing with the new variants. This is far from over. And when it is over, there's a huge job in restoring our public services as well, because there are lots of other health issues which have built up over the course of the last year. So I do think that the decision is right, that the full public inquiry starts next year, once we're out of the, or we hope we're out of the phase of responding to the pandemic and look to the future.
You've heard it there directly from someone whose life has been turned upside down by COVID. Hold the public inquiry now. Trust has been lost in the government. And frankly, it's hard really to know who to believe, but we have to leave it there. Housing Secretary Robert Jenrick, thanks very much indeed.